Welcome to another story in Simply Debbie Sue's Whispers. So it looks like last week you were treated to two stories. So we'll just say that you got a bonus story last week. So that was kind of a scheduling mistake on my part, the one that dropped late Saturday night. But that was a good mistake, right? So let's get into the introduction of this week's story. In small towns tucked between mountains and memory, the church bell is more than a sound. It's a soul. It marks beginnings and endings, calls the faithful to prayer, and reminds the weary that grace still echoes through the valleys. But sometimes the bell rings for reason no one knows, until silence reveals the story behind the sound. So the story begins. Every Sunday morning in Stone Hollow, just as the mist begins to lift from the hollers, and the birds tune their hymns, the church bell rang out, clear, steady, and faithful. Folks heard it while buttering biscuits, tying neckties, or brushing off their Bibles. It was as much part of the morning as coffee and quiet. The man behind the bell was Mr. Roy Bennett. He was the kind of man who spoke more with his eyes than with his mouth. He lived in a white clapboard house with a porch swing that creaked like it remembered better days. His garden bloomed with marigolds and mint. And every Sunday, he walked the short path to the church, climbed the narrow steps of the bell tower, and pulled the rope with reverence. No one ever asked why he did it. They just knew he did. What they didn't know was that Roy had made a promise. Years ago on a Sunday morning, his wife Lila had passed away quietly in her sleep. She was the kind of woman who wore pearls to potlucks and sang alto in the choir. That morning, Roy had sat beside her, holding her hand as the sun rose, and whispered, "I'll ring that bell for you every Sunday until I see you again." And he did. Rain or shine, Roy climbed those steps, through blizzards, heat waves, and the ache of aging knees. He rang the bell not just for tradition, but for love, for the memory of Lila and the rhythm of grace she left behind. Then one Sunday, the bell didn't ring. Folks noticed. They paused mid-sip, mid-step, mid-sentence. The silence was louder than the bell had ever been. Pastor John, sensing something sacred had been interrupted, walked to Roy's house after service. He found him in bed, pale and weak, his hands trembling. "I tried," he whispered, "but I couldn't make it up the steps." The next Sunday, the bell rang again, but it wasn't Roy. It was Caleb, the pastor's teenage son, who heard the story and asked to take Roy's place. The week after, Miss Cora rang it, then the Johnson's twins, then the mayor. Each person who stepped into the tower did so with a prayer and a memory of Lila, even if they'd never met her. They rang the bell, not just for Roy, but for every quiet promise ever made in love. Roy recovered slowly. He never rang the bell again, but he'd sit on his porch every Sunday, dressed in his best, listening. Sometimes he'd close his eyes and smile, as if he could hear his Lila's voice in the chime. When Roy passed, the town rang the bell 20 times, one for each year he'd kept his promise. And from that day on, the bell was rung by a different person each week, in honor of someone they loved. A new tradition, born from silence and devotion. The reflection of this story. Some love stories aren't written in words, they're rung in bells, fell in silence, and carried into the hearts of those who listen. Roy's devotion was quiet, steady, and unseen by most. But when the bell stopped, the town heard what it had been saying all along. May we all live with that kind of faithfulness. May our promises echo beyond us. And may our communities rise to carry the sound when we no longer can. Because sometimes the smallest acts, like ringing a bell, become the loudest testimonies of love. I hope you enjoyed the story this week. Come back next time for another story. Thank you so much for listening.